The notary stamped the last page, slid the stack of papers across the table, and said, "Congratulations, Ms. Wren, the unit is yours." I stared at those words for a second longer than I should have. Mine, a 28-year-old pediatric nurse from Dayton, Ohio, standing in a title company office that smelled like old carpet and printer toner, holding the keys to her first home. Nobody was waiting outside with balloons. Nobody knew I was there. That was exactly how I planned it. Most people don't understand what nursing actually looks like from the inside. The commercials show scrubs and smiling doctors and grateful patients. They don't show the part where you work back-to-back 12-hour shifts on a floor that's short-staffed by 4 nurses because the hospital won't approve overtime. They don't show you eating cold vending machine soup at 2 a.m. because you haven't had a real break since your shift started 9 hours ago. They don't show you driving home in the dark, too tired to cry, too wired to sleep, wondering if any of it is adding up to something. For me, it was adding up, quietly, deliberately, in a spreadsheet I kept on my phone that nobody else ever saw. I graduated nursing school with $34,000 in student loans and a second-hand stethoscope. I moved into the cheapest apartment I could find in a safe enough neighborhood, drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard, and packed my lunch every single day for 6 years. I picked up extra shifts when the hospital posted them. I declined every weekend trip, every bachelorette party in Miami, every spontaneous group dinner that my coworkers talked about on Monday. Not because I didn't want those things, because I wanted one thing more: a front door with my name on the deed. The condo I bought wasn't flashy: second floor, 2 bedrooms, updated kitchen, in-unit laundry, a small balcony that caught the afternoon sun just right. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary. To me, it looked like proof that 6 years of sacrifice had a return. I walked through every room after the notary left, running my hand along the counters, opening closet doors, standing in each doorway just to feel the space. There's something almost surreal about an empty home that belongs to you. No landlord's rules. No one else's furniture leaving rings on your floors. Just walls and light and quiet. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while because I hadn't bought furniture yet. The tile was cold through my jeans, but I didn't move. I just sat there with the keys in my hand and let myself feel it. I hadn't told my sister. My sister Renee has a talent that most people would never recognize as a talent because it masquerades as concern. She can take any piece of good news you have and, within 60 seconds, reframe it into a problem she needs you to solve. When I got into nursing school, she told people I was trying to escape the family. When I paid off my first credit card, she called to ask if I could spot her grocery money that month. When I mentioned once, at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, that I was thinking about buying a place of my own, she laughed. Not a mean laugh. The kind that dismisses you before you've even finished your sentence. "You," she said, reaching across the table for the rolls. "You're barely home as it is. What do you even need a house for? You'd be paying a mortgage on a place you sleep in 4 days a week." Her husband, Troy, nodded along like she'd said something wise. Their kids, Tyler and Maisie, were on their tablets. Nobody looked at me. I remember picking up my fork and taking a bite of something I couldn't taste and deciding right then that if I ever closed on a property, Renee would find out when I was ready for her to find out. Not a moment before. So I didn't say anything, not when I got pre-approved. Not when I put in the offer. Not when the inspection came back clean. Not when I signed. I told 2 people total, my coworker June, because she co-signed nothing, but she listened to everything, and my friend Dex, because he helped me move the couch and didn't ask questions. For 2 weeks after closing, I lived in quiet I hadn't experienced since before I started taking night shifts. I unpacked boxes slowly. I picked out a rug. I learned which floorboard near the bathroom creaked and which one didn't. I made coffee in the morning and stood on the balcony and watched the parking lot come to life, and nobody called to ask me for anything. I should have known it wouldn't last. It started with a photo, not mine. My friend Dex posted something on Instagram from when he helped me move in. Just a casual picture of us standing in the kitchen, me holding a spatula, the new curtains behind me in the background. He tagged me. I was working a night shift when it went up and didn't see it until my break at 3 a.m. My stomach dropped the moment I spotted it in my notifications, not because it was a bad photo, because I could see the window, the angle of the light, the cabinet hardware. Anyone who knew what they were looking for would know I'd moved somewhere new. I texted Dex immediately. He apologized, deleted it within the hour, but an hour is long enough. By the time I got home the next morning, there was a text from Renee. Nice kitchen. When did you move? No congratulations. No, oh wow, did you buy a place? Just, when did you move? Like she was already annoyed she hadn't been informed of a schedule change. I put my phone face down on the counter and made coffee. I stood at the window and drank it slowly and thought about how to answer. The truth was simple. I'd bought a condo. I hadn't told her because I knew exactly what would happen if I did, but explaining that would take more energy than I had after a 12-hour night shift. I texted back recently, still settling in. She called within 4 minutes. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was exactly what I expected, breezy and pointed at the same time. Hey, so I saw Dex's photo. Your place looks really nice. You should have told me. I would have helped you move. Anyway, the kids would love to see your new place. We're free most weekends. Let me know. She paused. Also, is that a 2-bedroom? Because Tyler's been sharing with Maisie and it's been a whole thing. I sat with that last sentence for a long time. Is that a 2-bedroom? She hadn't asked how I was. She hadn't asked how I afforded it or if I was happy or if the commute to work was manageable. She'd gone straight to the square footage like she was calculating something. I didn't call back that day or the next. I texted her eventually, told her I'd have her over once I got settled, and left it vague. She pushed twice more that week, each message a little more pointed than the last. By Friday, she'd sent a photo of Tyler and Maisie at a cramped desk with the caption, "Don't you think they deserve more space than this?" I put my phone in a drawer and went to bed. She showed up 2 Saturdays later. I hadn't invited her. I heard a knock and looked through the peephole, and there she was. Troy beside her, Tyler and Maisie behind them, with backpacks on like they were coming for a sleepover. I opened the door with my coffee still in my hand. Surprise, Renee said, smiling past me into the entryway. We were in the area. I live 22 minutes from her house. Nobody is in the area of my neighborhood by accident. I stepped back enough to let them in because blocking the door would have started a different kind of fight, and I didn't want that fight on my own doorstep with my neighbors nearby. They came in and Renee immediately started doing the thing she does. Slow rotation, eyes moving across every surface like she was inventorying the place. This is really nice, she said in a tone that was more assessment than compliment. How much did you pay for this? I deflected. She pushed again, softer this time, and I gave her a number and a range and moved the conversation along. Tyler and Maisie had already disappeared upstairs. I could hear them opening doors. Troy stood in the kitchen with his hands in his pockets. Nice setup, he said. He meant it neutrally, but Renee was already 3 sentences ahead. You've got 2 bedrooms up there, right? Tyler is 12 now, you know. He and Maisie can't keep sharing. It's not appropriate anymore. She turned to face me. You're barely here with your schedule. Have you thought about? No, I said, flat, clear, no elaboration. She blinked. I wasn't even done. I know what you were going to say. She laughed, the dismissive one, and looked at Troy like I was being dramatic. I was just going to say, have you thought about renting out the extra room? It would help with the mortgage. That wasn't what she was going to say. We both knew it. They stayed for 40 minutes. I walked them to the door. When Renee left, she paused on the threshold and looked back at the kitchen, then at me. You should give me a spare key, she said, in case of emergencies. I said I would think about it. I didn't. What I did instead was change the locks the following Monday. I know, the original locks weren't compromised. She hadn't taken a key. But I'd watched her eyes land on my key hook by the door 3 separate times during that visit. She'd stood near it while she was putting her shoes back on. I wasn't going to wait and find out. New deadbolts, front and back, a sliding bar lock on the balcony door. And I called a security company that Tuesday. By Thursday, I had cameras in the entryway, the living room and the balcony. Motion activated, linked to my phone. The installation guy looked at my keypad and said, "You expecting trouble?" "Just cautious," I said. The system also had a feature where any unrecognized face near the front door got a push alert to my phone. I set it up, tested it twice, and went back to work. Renee texted a week later asking about the spare key. I told her I hadn't gotten around to a spare yet. She sent a thumbs up emoji. Something about that emoji unsettled me more than words would have. 3 weeks later, I had a stretch of 4 days off in a row, which almost never happens, and I drove up to visit my college roommate in Indianapolis. I told nobody where I was going except June at work. I left the Friday morning after my last shift, windows down, music up, feeling like a person again. The first night was fine. The second night, I got a push alert at 11:47 p.m. Motion at front door. I tapped the notification. The camera was clear. Renee, standing in my doorway, a tote bag over her shoulder, a key in her hand. A key in her hand. I watched the footage for 10 seconds before my brain caught up with what I was seeing. She fit the key into the lock. Turned it. It didn't work. She tried again. Stepped back. Looked at the lock more closely. Tried once more. The new deadbolt held. She stood there for a moment, then turned and looked directly at the camera like she'd only just noticed it. Her face was hard to read on the small screen, but she wasn't startled. She was calculating. Then she walked back down the hallway and out of frame. I sat in my college roommate's guest room with my phone on my chest and stared at the ceiling. She'd had a key made. Somehow, during that first visit, she had gotten a copy made of my original key. Maybe she'd taken it briefly while Troy was distracting me. Maybe she pressed it into something in her bag. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that she'd tried to use it. She'd come to my home while I was out of town with a bag, planning to let herself in. I called the non-emergency police line and reported it. The officer I spoke to was patient. He walked me through my options. He said that because she hadn't successfully entered and technically had a key at some point she claimed was given to her, it was complicated to pursue criminally at this stage. But he also said, "Document everything. If she tries again, you'll have what you need." I documented everything. Timestamp on the footage, my change of locks receipt, the timeline of her messages asking for a key that I'd never actually given her. I sent it all to my email and downloaded it to a folder on my laptop. Then I called a locksmith first thing Saturday morning and had the deadbolts changed again. I didn't cut my trip short. I stayed all 4 days, partly because I wasn't going to let Renee's choices rearrange my life, and partly because I needed those 4 days more than I could explain. When I got home Sunday night, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Lock solid, cameras clean, the balcony sliding bar in place. I made tea and sat on the couch and let the quiet settle over me and thought about what I was going to do next. She called Monday afternoon, casual, like nothing had happened. "Hey, are you back? I swung by Friday night, you weren't home. Thought maybe we could grab dinner or something." "Swung by with a key," I said. Silence. "What?" Her voice changed, not startled, careful. "I have cameras, Renee. I saw you." Another silence, longer this time. Then she exhaled and her voice shifted into the tone she uses when she's been caught but isn't ready to admit it. "It was an emergency." "What was the emergency?" "I needed somewhere for the kids to." She stopped, started again. "Troy and I had a fight. A bad one. I needed somewhere to go, and I knew you weren't home, and I thought." "You thought you'd let yourself into my home without asking." "You're my sister." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "Yes. And my home is still my home. You don't have a key, Renee. You were never given a key. What you had was a copy you made without my permission." "I don't know what you're." "I have the footage, and I have the timeline of every message where you asked me for a spare, and I didn't give you one. If you do this again, I'm not calling you. I'm calling the police." She hung up. I sat with the silence after that call for a long time. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I half expected them to. But they were steady. I think I'd been building to that conversation for years without knowing it. Her next move came 11 days later. on a Tuesday evening when I was working. The camera alert came through around 7:30 p.m. I checked it on my break. Renee again, this time with Maisie beside her. No key this time. She knocked. When I didn't answer, she tried the door handle. Knocked again. She said something to Maisie. I couldn't make out through the audio. Then she took a photo of my front door. I don't know why. Documentation of her own, maybe. Or just something to send to the family group chat. She sent me a text 20 minutes later. We came by. Your neighbors let us in the building, needed to talk. The building has a buzzer system. Somebody had let her in. I made a note to talk to the property manager. I didn't respond to the text that night. I worked the rest of my shift, drove home, checked every lock before I took off my shoes, and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. I wrote down every incident, dates, times, what happened, what was said, what I could prove with footage. I wasn't doing it for a lawsuit. I was doing it because I needed to see it laid out in front of me to understand what I was actually dealing with. Because when you're in it, when it's your sister calling and texting and showing up, it starts to feel like you're overreacting. You start to ask yourself if a normal person would just give her a key. If a normal person would just let it go. The list in my notebook said otherwise. I contacted a real estate attorney the following week, not to sue Renee, just to understand where I stood. She told me that unauthorized entry, even with a copied key, was trespassing in Ohio. She told me that if I had footage of an attempt combined with evidence that I'd never authorized a key, I had a solid basis for a police report and potentially a no-contact order if it continued. I thanked her, paid her flat consultation fee, and went home with the clarity that I wasn't imagining things. The call that shifted everything came from my mom. She'd clearly been briefed by Renee because she led with, "Honey, I hear you're having some trouble with your sister." The word trouble used to describe what Renee had done. Sat wrong with me, but I let her talk. "She's going through a hard time with Troy," my mom said. "The kids are really struggling with the space situation. You know Tyler's getting older, and you have all that room." "Mom," I said quietly. She made a copy of my key and let herself into my home while I was out of town. Pause. "Well," she said. "She said it was because of an emergency." She said that to me too. There was no emergency. She came with a tote bag. Another pause. Longer. "I'm not saying it was the right thing to do," my mom said carefully. "But you know how Renee is. She doesn't always think before she acts. Maybe you could just..." "Just what?" She didn't finish the sentence. I think she knew there was no version of that sentence that was going to land well. "I love you," I said. "But what Renee did was not okay, and I'm not going to pretend it was to keep the peace." My mom said she understood. I'm not sure she did entirely, but she didn't push. The hard part wasn't the legal piece. The hard part was the hours between midnight and 4 a.m. when I was awake anyway, running the same loop in my head. Was I wrong to keep the condo quiet? Was I wrong to keep the condo quiet? Was I wrong to change the locks without saying anything? Was I too rigid? Too cold? Is this just what families do and I'm the one who doesn't know how to bend? I'd get up and make tea and sit at the kitchen table where the lamplight was warm and the rest of the unit was dark and quiet. And I'd think about the version of myself who handed Renee a spare key. Who let her kids use the second bedroom when she was fighting with Troy? Who turned my first home into a communal crash pad because the alternative was too uncomfortable to hold? And I'd think about the 6 years it took to get here, the shifts I stayed late for, the trips I didn't take, the Saturday mornings I drove to the hospital while everyone else was sleeping in. The spreadsheet on my phone I updated every month, every small number inching towards something larger. No, I wasn't bending this time. The decision came together over the course of about a week. I talked to June. I talked to Dex. I talked to my attorney one more time. And then I called the non-emergency line again and filed a formal report, attaching the original footage from the Friday night attempt, the locksmith receipts, and the documented timeline of her requests for a key I never gave. The officer who took the report was thorough. He said they'd follow up with Renee directly. He said the footage was clear and the timeline was consistent, and that this met the threshold for criminal trespass attempt. Whether charges were pursued further would depend on the DA's office, but the report would be on record. I thanked him, hung up, and sat for a minute in the quiet. An hour later, Renee called, voice shaking. The police came to my house. I know. You filed a report? On your own sister? You made a copy of my key and tried to let yourself into my home while I was out of town. This is so over the top. You're going to ruin things over a house. Over my house, I said, that I bought with money I earned on my own. She cried, or she made the sounds of crying. Renee has always been good at that. I let her finish before I said anything else. I'm not trying to ruin your life, I said, but I'm also not going to apologize for protecting mine. What you did was a crime, Renee, not a miscommunication, a crime. She said I was being dramatic. She said the kids were struggling. She said she didn't know what she was going to do if Troy didn't figure his stuff out. She said a lot of things. I said, I hope things get better for you. I do. But you can't come to my home without being invited. If that happens again, it won't be a report. It'll be a restraining order. She hung up without responding. Troy called the next day, calm, measured, which surprised me. He said he didn't know she'd done it. He said he was sorry, sincerely enough that I believed him. He said she'd had some things to figure out about boundaries, and he was going to make sure she figured them out. I thanked him and said I hoped so and left it there. The fallout came from the extended family, as it always does. My aunt left me a voicemail saying blood was blood and some things should stay private. A cousin texted to say she'd heard what happened and wasn't going to take sides but hoped we could work it out. A family friend, my mom's age, who I barely know, sent me a Facebook message asking if I considered that Renee was probably just overwhelmed. I read all of it, answered almost none of it. The one person who said exactly what I needed to hear was my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Okonkwo. I ran into her in the elevator one evening and she must have noticed I looked tired because she said, without prelude, "Everything okay up there?" I told her briefly what had happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You keep your locks good. You don't owe family a door they didn't earn." I laughed, and it felt like the first real laugh I'd had in a week. Renee and I haven't spoken since. It's been almost 3 months. Some days that feels like a wound. Other days it just feels quiet, and not the sad kind. I still walk through this condo every morning before I leave for a shift. I check the locks. The way I always have. Front door, back door, balcony. Not from fear. From habit. From the same discipline that made me pack a lunch every day for 6 years when I could have ordered delivery. The same discipline that kept that spreadsheet updated every month until the number got big enough to mean something. I am 28 years old and I own something. Not perfectly. The water pressure in the second bathroom is a little low and the HOA has opinions about potted plants on balconies. But it's mine. Every inch of it. Nobody signed those closing documents but me. Nobody made those extra shifts but me. Nobody sat on that cold tile floor the first night with keys in her hand, feeling something she didn't have words for but me. My friend June came over for dinner last weekend and we ate tacos on the balcony and watched the sun go down and didn't talk about Renee or Troy or keys or cameras. We talked about a hiking trail she'd found and a show we'd both been meaning to watch and whether the apartment across the parking lot had actually been renovated or if the new lighting was just doing a lot of work. Ordinary stuff. Easy stuff. When she left, I walked her to the elevator and came back inside and stood in the kitchen for a minute after the door clicked shut. The quiet wrapped around me the way it does now, familiar instead of lonely. I thought about the version of me that might have handed over a spare key, might have let the guilt win, might have looked at Tyler and Maisie's faces and told myself a lie about what it meant to be a good sister. And then I thought about this. I worked 13 years to become who I am. 6 years to save what I saved. I have cried in hospital parking lots. I have gone home so tired I couldn't form a sentence. I have missed birthdays and parties and ordinary evenings that I will never get back. And all of that, every bit of it, led to one thing. A door I can lock. A key only I hold. A quiet that belongs to no one but me. I'm not cold. I'm not selfish. I'm not the villain in the story Renee tells at family dinners. I'm just someone who finally decided that the peace I fought for was worth defending, even when the threat came from inside the family, especially then. And some nights, when the building is still and the lamplight is warm and the locks are all set, I sit at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and I feel it settle over me the way it always does now. The clean, uncluttered certainty that I don't owe anyone an apology for keeping what I earned. I've thought a lot about why I didn't feel guilty when I filed that report. I expected to. I expected to sit in my car afterward and second-guess everything, replay every moment, ask myself if I'd been too hard on her. But I didn't. I just drove home, unlocked my front door, and made tea. I think that's because what I did wasn't cruel. It was honest. And honesty, when you've spent years softening it for other people's comfort, feels a lot like cruelty until you realize it isn't. Here's what I know about how things like this happen. They don't start with someone breaking into your home. They start years earlier, at a dinner table, when someone says something dismissive about your dream and the people around them nod along, and you sit there and swallow it. They start when you learn that keeping the peace means making yourself smaller. And then one day the smallness runs out and you have a choice, fold again or hold the line. I held the line, and yes, it cost me something. Renee and I haven't spoken in months. My mom is careful on the phone now. The family group chat goes quiet when I post anything. That's real. And some days it sits heavy. But I think about what it would have cost me to fold. Not just the condo, not just the spare room, but something harder to name. The knowing that I'd built something real and then handed the keys over because I was too tired to defend it. That cost would have been permanent in a way that silence in a family group chat isn't. What Renee didn't come from nowhere. It came from a pattern I'd helped create by never saying no clearly enough, by letting her reframe my choices as selfishness and not correcting her, by absorbing her entitlement for so long it started to feel like just the way things were. I'm not blaming myself for her choices. She made them. But I'm clear-eyed enough to see that the pattern took two of us to build, and it was going to take one of us deciding to stop. I decided. That decision required something I'd underestimated for most of my adult life. It required me to trust my own judgment when everyone around me was telling me I was wrong. To look at the footage, at the receipts, at the timeline of every message she'd sent asking for a key I never gave her, and say, I see what this is. I'm not confused. I'm not overreacting. I know what I saw. That kind of clarity is its own form of strength. It doesn't come from certainty that you're right. It comes from being willing to look at the facts without flinching. And then there's the part that took the longest. 6 years of packed lunches and skipped trips and extra shifts. 6 years of choosing the spreadsheet over the impulse, the goal over the weekend. That kind of discipline doesn't just build savings. It builds a version of yourself that doesn't collapse when someone tells you your sacrifice was selfish. Because you were there for every one of those mornings. You know what it cost. Nobody else's opinion can touch that. I am not a perfect person. I'm not a perfect sister. But I am someone who works hard, pays attention, and refuses to hand over what she's built to someone who never helped build it. The locks hold, the cameras run, the tea is hot. And I sleep fine.